Performance Car of the Year and now Sports Car of the Year. It's the most enjoyable week because I get to spend every day, every waking moment surrounded by people that love cars, that live and breathe cars.
Especially with what's happened the past 2 years with the pandemic and stuff like that, just to have everyone there geeking out on our passion is just, it's the best week of your life, really.
I'm lucky because I work with a bunch of very passionate automotive engineers, but really all you have to focus on in that week is just driving the cars, assessing the cars. The passion just goes up a notch.
The heart of motor is entrenched in how the car makes you feel. Does the car make you want to drive it further and further and longer and longer? We measure against a number of select criteria, and it ranges from the pragmatic, how accessible a car is and how easy to live with it is, and obviously performance is a large component of that. Then there's the more intangible side, like X factor.
That's the great thing about Performance Car of the Year. You get these cars that are a little bit underrated, might be a little bit ignored, and you put them into the same cauldron as everything else, and they can really, really surprise you.
These three cars are the axis of power for Picotti. It's the German definition, the Italian definition, and the American definition of a supercar. And they do those things very differently. The GT3 is pure evolution. It is the ultimate version of the ultimate track car.
They are experts at what they do, and they've had 70 odd years perfecting this recipe of rear engine dynamics.
This 992 generation car is harder and angrier than any 911 GT3 before. But is it too hard, too angry? Has the pendulum swung too far? That's what we're looking to find out.
The Huracan is theatre, it's emotion, it's Italian pizzazz.
There's just so much drama with that car. And it's easy to be lulled that it's all drama and just drama, but you drive the car and it is extravagantly talented. It is a really, really talented package. It has changed so much from the first Huracan that we've got. Underestimate this one at your peril.
And the American is just throwing out the recipe and trying again with something new, something radical, and something that they've never done before. But they do it with such confidence that you can't help but be enamored with that concept.
It's almost worth just clearing your mind of any preconceptions that you have around Corvette, because it is so different.
It was a big gamble for GM to make the Corvette mid-engined.
You know, it packs a lot of punch for the money, probably unmatched on the dollar for dollar front. American sports cars have a certain reputation, and the Corvette C8 shatters virtually every one of them.
We've got high hopes for this one. The Jaguar F-Type is just one of those cars that once you've walked away from it, you can't help but stop and look back at it. It's just a beautiful thing.
So this is a car that Jag stopped offering to Australians for a long time. We got a V6 version instead. And then the local press office said, you know what, we're going to bring the V8 back and we're going to make it cheaper than the V6.
At that price point, with that much power, that much theatre, it starts making a lot of sense.
The Jaguar actually has some pretty big boots to fill, because the last time we turned up at Picotti with a rear-wheel drive V8 Jaguar F-Type, it finished on the podium. So expectations are quite high for this one.
The Germans are excellent at building sports sedans, and their talents are probably best exemplified with the B3 and the M3 because you have the same chassis, you've got the same engine.
It really is a testament to how different you can engineer two cars that start from the same beginnings.
What they have created are two entirely different versions of a sports sedan. You have the aggressive, pointed, brutish M3 with a manual gearbox and rear-wheel drive, which is just the classic mix.
When this car first appeared and people looked at the weight of it, they figured that the M3 might have lost its edge, but anything but. The M3 is fiercer than ever. And this is the manual entry-level car, the purest one of the lot, arguably. We're really looking forward to it.
The Alpina is a torque monster. Everywhere in that power band, and particularly low down, it just makes so much torque.
If you really get after it, that car has teeth. It really does. It's four-wheel drive. You can get on the gas so early in the corner.
And it'll be interesting to see how it copes. We know it's going to be great on the road, but when we get it to Phillip Island, it'll be interesting to see how that fares there.
Yeah, the Taycan and the Boxster are proof that Porsche can both do old school and new school at the same time, and those things aren't mutually exclusive.
The Taycan has a big weight of expectation on its shoulders. It's the first EV to ever appear at Picotti, and it's a Porsche. So people are looking at this car and wondering, is it going to cut it?
And the Boxster is just classic old school Porsche. Flat six, mid-engined, naturally aspirated. It's just pure Porsche.
Everyone thinks they know the Porsche Boxster, but this one's a little bit different. It's a 25 years, and it comes with the 4-litre flat six, and it just revs to high heaven. And I think this one could be a bit of a sleeper in the pack.
The pick of the Picotti field so far on the road has definitely been the Lamborghini Huracan. It is such a showman of a car. It's full supercar rock star status. It's just thrilling, whatever you're doing in it.
It's small in there, it's cramped. I beat my head every time I get into the damn thing. But you don't mind because the payoff is so great.
I sort of approached that car with a bit of cynicism. Nothing about that car is conventional. Even driving it on the road loops, you know, it takes a good few minutes just to get comfortable with the controls. They have designed that car specifically to be different. But once you get going and you rattle through those first 3 gears, it all makes sense.
The chassis is very, very good on the Lamborghini, but the engine is just standout. A V10 naturally aspirated engine. It's not long for this world, but it makes the world a better place.
It has so much of a different nature to the Audi R8, which surprised me.
They're chalk and cheese. The Huracan is just such a more urgent, angry car.
Again, I think a lot of that's by design. I think everything about that Lamborghini is just geared to deliver the maximum theatre and the maximum drama in everything you do.
I'm just so looking forward to seeing that car on track because I think that might be the only thing that's going to eclipse the 992 GT3 on the lap of Phillip Island, and I want to be standing on the pit wall when Luffy comes past fully lit up in that thing. The Jaguar F-Type P450 rear-wheel drive is a gem of a thing, and it's impossible to drive that car without just wanting to poke the bear and just get that sound of the V8.
That engine dominates the experience, and it is full heavy metal and you just want to lay in the throttle every time that you're driving that car.
You could drive that car to Sydney and get out feeling totally refreshed. But you could go by some really sporty roads and have an absolute ball.
The problem with the F-Type is that you don't really get enough feeling through the front end, through the steering. That would be its biggest dynamic flaw for me.
It's pretty quick, but it is slightly soft-edged, and most of the judges didn't like the steering, which is like a hangover from the Mike Cross days. Maybe that will change with the next generation of Jaguars. I hope it does, because I'd like a Jaguar with real meat in its steering.
The Porsche Boxster is just a fantastic sports car. The steering in particular feels so alive in your hands that you are aware of everything that it's doing. It's beautiful and delicate on turn in.
It's just an impressive car. It does nothing wrong, and it's got that beautiful feel through the steering that you get with a Porsche. You know, input into the steering equals reaction from the car. Everything's very linear, predictable, and gives you beautiful feedback that makes driving enjoyable.
The 4-litre engine is one that slightly frustrates me on the road because the gearing is so long. You never feel that you're getting the best out of it. And as a result, you're driving the car in a zone, more often than not, where it doesn't sound very good.
The Boxster can sort of fade away into itself because of just how confident it is. Perhaps it is a bit lower on X factor than, say, the Lamborghini or the GT3.
The Porsche Taycan Turbo S does have a very different driving experience, and being the first electric car to ever compete in Performance Car of the Year is an accolade in and of itself.
It's a towering achievement from Porsche to make that car handle as it does. Like with me on board, it's 2,400 kilos. And in pitch and in roll, it is so well tied down. It's unbelievable. And it's only in pure heave, when you bump up over something, that you feel the weight in that chassis and you feel the amount of kinetic energy that that thing piles on at that rate.
It disguises its weight pretty well through the sheer ease at which it puts on pace, and that can catch you out if you come into a corner too hot, because yeah, suddenly you're very abruptly reminded that you're driving a very heavy car.
That car has just got huge capability and huge speed. Driving it at 6/10, 7/10 on a windy road, it freaked me out a bit because I didn't like the feel from the four-wheel steering. Once you got up to driving it at 9/10, 9.5/10, it became a much more engaging car than what it is at 6 or 7/10. And that was really impressive for me.
It's really an interesting, fascinating car, and I can't wait to get it on the track.
Having a Corvette available in Australia in right-hand drive, direct from Bowling Green, is a huge thing for Australian customers. And the good news is the Corvette is actually a very impressive performance car.
On the road, that engine behind you sounds great, pulls for days.
You would think with a big 6.2 litre naturally aspirated V8 that it would make all its power down low, but if you rev that thing all the way to redline, there's tons of enjoyment to be found right at the top of the rev range.
To me, it felt quite isolated from a powertrain perspective, so it feels like the engine and the transmission are on reasonably soft mounts. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It feels nice and comfortable. The ride feels like it's got really well damped but long travel softish suspension. It's got MagneRide, so you can put it in a stiffer setting for the track.
And the interior is no less wacky than the exterior.
Ergonomically, it's quite confused. You've got this square-ish round wheel ahead of you. You sit quite high, the roof is quite low.
The layout of the central stack and that sort of tall waterfall of buttons, it'd be impossible to use without taking your eyes off the road.
The powertrain is so refined at low speed, but then you switch to a different mode and stick your foot into the pedal and it just gives it a whole new character again.
As a road car, it is excellent. It is really good. And the way that that car is priced, around the price of a C63 AMG, you're getting one heck of a bargain there.
The biggest surprise for me so far has definitely been the BMW M3. It is the cheapest M3 you can buy. It's a non-competition rear-wheel drive manual. It's not until you experience that car that there are so many layers to it that start to unpack. It has this incredibly confidence-inspiring front end.
With the M3, everything flows from the front end. It's very, very precise. And it gives you enormous confidence to turn the car into a corner, knowing that the back will follow it round.
I tried not to get caught up in the fact that it was a manual and think it's great just because it is a manual. For me, the actual gear change itself isn't perfect. It's good, but it's not perfect.
Driving that car around at low speed, sort of before we'd properly gotten into testing, I was left a little underwhelmed. But then spending more time with that car, you know, driving it on the road loops, that's a gearbox that gets better the faster you go.
And I'm saying, I'm not really confident about the M3. I don't think it's going to be the right car for me. Got in the car, drove it up the mountain, drove it back down the mountain, got out of the car and said, I want one of those. Totally changed my mind. And it got better from there.
It's a perfectly livable car, and it's also one that will change at the tap of a button to be a serious performance machine.
I'd accept the compromises on the road. The high revving, the slightly non-mechanical gear shift and the boominess and tyre noise, you'd accept them because it does everything else, you know, so well. Just a little bit more engagement at low speed would be good.
The work that Alpina's done on that engine, on the S58, with their own specific turbos just to increase the torque level, it drives a lot different than the M3.
It's super refined, it's super fast, it's got some old school like turbo lag. It's just got this nice little bump up in performance when the turbos really kick in.
The B3 with the all-wheel drive and the extra traction, it would just fire you out of corners.
Steering was not as clean as in the M3 when you really up it because you've got some drive shafts going to those wheels and doesn't have the track width or the tyre width of the M3.
The Porsche 911 GT3 is annoyingly good on road, and it is just incredibly composed, yet focused and yet compliant.
I was shocked at how well damped that car is on very less than perfect roads.
The GT3 is an experience when you drive it on road because it's designed to be so capable on a racetrack, and it has many race car-like qualities which it then brings back to the road.
I think you'd have to be brave to daily drive a GT3, but I think you definitely could.
You've got these noises of stones in the wheel well pinging about, and you've got this half cage behind you where you sit, and this giant wing feels your mirrors, and yet it still manages to be enjoyable in that setting.
The way that the new front suspension presents the tyre to the road, it moves the EPAS, the electric power steering, into a whole new realm. The car just falls into the apex, just drops off the cambers like a really, really good hydraulic power system, something like a Lotus.
There's a lot going on. You'll get a lot of movement through the wheel, but it's always confidence inspiring because you know that the car is just going to track straight and true.
So the GT3 is improved as a road car, and it's not harsh, it's not crashy, it's just a consummate performer, but it's loud and it's focused, and you accept those trade-offs because it's something very, very special indeed.
What it gives you in the ultimate levels of feedback and response and competency when you push the car is beyond anything else, I believe, on the road right now. Yeah, it's the duck's guts.
Phillip Island is a daunting track, but it's also exciting.
Yeah, there's no other track like Phillip Island.
That is a circuit that demands respect. It is a circuit that will challenge us, and it will challenge the cars.
Sometimes it's easy to be lulled into thinking a car is a great performance car if it performs really well on the road. But an integral part of Performance Car of the Year is that it has to perform on track.
I had to reevaluate my order of judging by the time we'd finished.
And there were some cars that fell to pieces a little bit on track. And there were some cars that just burnished their reputation.
The BMW M3 is a car that you really need to be on top of your own ability when you're driving it on track, because there's a lot of power there for a manual only going through the rear wheels. So it can get pretty leery pretty quickly. The good thing is that it's got this M Dynamic mode, which makes you feel like an absolute hero.
That ESC system, you put it into that MDM mode, it's like a really well calibrated sweet spot. It'll let you get really decent yaw angles out of it, and it's just a really sublime thing to drive.
So on track, I think the fact that it was manual, of course, might make it a tiny bit slower, but as an experience and a thing to enjoy, it was fantastic.
One of the biggest strengths of the M3 on track isn't actually the rear axle, it's the front. It has this amazing amount of front end grip, which means you can dive into corners with huge amounts of confidence. And then you get to corner exit, press the throttle into the firewall and have a huge power oversteer moment. It's just green inducing at every corner.
It's such a fun car on the limit. It does everything that you want. You can sort of steer it from the rear, you get on the throttle, it starts to oversteer. It gives you all those senses of adrenaline. This car makes you work hard for it, but it also rewards you as a good driver as well.
This car is unbelievable fun on the racetrack. You really need to trail brake into a corner to get the most out of the front end, but if you do, it's super planted and super confidence inspiring. You have this amazing induction noise in the cabin, and the Tremec gearbox is fantastic.
Wow, haven't they come a long way, because that trans is just fantastic.
I thought the Corvette C8 was going to be a handful, but in fact it was super benign. I couldn't really believe it.
It's the car on track that I felt like I could push the hardest once I got comfortable with it, which was a really big surprise to me.
Steering was a little bit Sega Rally for me. I didn't like it from that perspective so much, but everything else, it was a real surprise,
It's not often that you get out of a car with that much power and think, I can see how this car could use another 100 kilowatts. And that is a sign of a really, really well sorted chassis.
Look, that thing is really fun to drive on the limit. It's not the fastest car in a straight line. It doesn't have massive horsepower, but thank God for Americans, and they recognise the need for some sound. I think it's actually louder in the car than what it is outside the car. Probably the biggest disappointment is the gearing. Like second, third and fourth gear is real short and snappy, but it's like they've geared fifth gear and beyond already to take it to Bonneville Salt Flats. In terms of overall driver feedback and enjoyment, it's actually a good car. Bang for buck wise, it's right up there.
The Porsche 911 GT3 has so many race car elements put into it, but you don't understand its true potential until it's let loose at Phillip Island. And the way that it is able to just put on a level of speed and show its performance in a way that no other car in this field can do is astounding.
On track, it feels bulletproof. The new independent front suspension replaces the old struts, and it means that the car doesn't need a really, really firm damper to support itself in dive. So there is a level of subtlety and tactility in that car, and it manifests through the steering as well, that you never got with the last generation car. So it's a marked improvement.
Even from the outlap at Phillip Island and turning in at, 7/10, which are still 160, 170 kilometres an hour. From that instant turn-in phase and that immediateness of response and the way you can feel the front end dig in, that is a car that is unbelievably good.
It turns in like nothing else I've driven on track. You kind of actually need to adjust your driving style, otherwise you end up turning in before the apex.
So much mechanical grip, so much aero, just your confidence to sort of lean into the accelerator mid-corner earlier than you think, constantly earlier than the last lap. It's such an impressive car.
They keep bridging that gap in terms of the performance on track, getting it closer to being a race car without compromising it as a road car. Like, this car around this circuit is proper impressive. The amount of grip through the high speed stuff, the drivability, the gearbox is amazing. Like, you're trying to fault the unfaultable almost.
You could drive this car to a racetrack and punish it all day in a way that is faster than any other car, is more enjoyable than any other car, and then it'll just shrug its shoulders, look at you and say, let's drive home.
The Alpina is one car that works fantastically as a road car, but it perhaps felt a little bit outshone on track.
If you get out of an M3 and into an Alpina and try and drive it like an M3 or expect it to be an M3, then you're going to come away disappointed. You have to reset and realise that the Alpina is a car that has its own cadence.
This thing is so much fun on the limit. It's just all about rotating it as quick as you can and getting back to the throttle and just using all of that drive on the exit. Even though it's quite a big car, it's one that you can really sort of manoeuvre and do what you want at the mid-corner point.
Against the clock on the straight, my word, the Alpina gave the GT3 the hurry up. It was very, very close, and that car would surprise a lot of people on road if they ever found themselves at the lights next to one of those.
The Porsche Boxster is seriously quick on track, and the circuit is where that gearbox is best used. It's enough space for that car to fully reach its red line in several gears, and so suddenly everything makes sense.
You're just ringing the thing out all the time, and it sounds really, really good, and the balance of the car is as good as you expect it to be, and everything just gels.
I was struggling to find an X factor on the road. On the track, I found its X factor. It just gave so much feedback through the wheel, had so much grip. You feel like you can trust the car and keep digging deeper and deeper into its depth of capability.
Much like the Corvette, it's one of those cars where you feel like you can get on the limit very quickly in that car on track, and it's working with you. But in saying that, it's not a boring car to drive either.
It feels like it's giving you just the nudges, make you a better driver, and that's the mark of a great performance car.
This car was actually a real surprise packet in terms of how much front end grip it actually has. It could probably show up some of the other cars in terms of its entry speed and its ability to be able to maintain that speed and still get the mid-corner rotation and not lose any time on the exit. It's one of those cars where you just kept giving it more and it would always sort of take it.
The Jag was perhaps a little bit out of place on the circuit. This is a car that is designed to be driven on road, and so the racetrack wasn't ever going to be its native hunting ground. There's a lot to enjoy about it, but there are a lot of things that are also getting in the way of getting the most out of that car.
All of that drama on road that you get from the engine, that sudden point and squirt and excitement, on track, where you're wide open throttle for quite a lot of the lap at Phillip Island, you just tire of like this blare of the V8. Something that you crave on the road becomes annoying on the track almost.
The steering is quite springy and can feel a bit artificial, if not a bit vague. And the way that the suspension is engineered, you really need to wait for the car to settle onto its haunches before you really lay into it, and that can be a little bit frustrating at times on track.
For everything that makes the Jaguar so good on road, it's probably its shortfalls here on the track. It's a little bit too soft. You can't turn ESC all the way off. It's still a fun car to drive, but those limitations become a bit of a drama out here.
The Taycan is a bit of a kinetic weapon. It is capable of putting on so much speed so quickly while also carrying this huge amount of heft, which actually proves to be a little bit of a challenge at Phillip Island, particularly in braking zones.
The acceleration is ludicrous. It's, you know, everything about EVs that you come to expect, that sort of instant torque. But beyond that sort of initial shock and awe, it's a really fun thing to drive?
The surprising thing for me was it actually was a little bit more playful than I thought it was going to be.
It doesn't slow down above 150 kilometers an hour. Most electric cars have this great shock from a standstill that kind of tapers, but the 2-speed gearbox in the Taycan means that you click into second gear and it keeps pulling. You're firing towards Bass Strait, and somehow the speedo is still going up and up and up into these really scary sort of speeds. There's four-wheel steering, there is torque vectoring going on, there's a lot of things helping you, and you need to understand what those systems are doing to really get the best out of the car.
That car is proper impressive out here on the track. Like, it is beyond bizarre to drive on the limit because there's no noise, but there's just this sudden rush of power and torque, and it's just like, I stopped looking at 260 at the end of the straight. So you're talking getting close to sort of V8 supercar speeds at the end of the straight. And considering the overall size and weight of the car, the way that it handles the corners is super impressive.
Driving the Lamborghini is quite literally spine tingling. As that car reaches the top of the rev range, everything inside of you is vibrating as that V10 absolutely screams, and it makes an ungodly, amazing sound.
Everything feels like it happens on 2 times speed in that car. The brakes are so ferocious. You know, you can brake really late in that car, and then, you know, you sort of turn in and it's so point and shoot.
Surprised me how lively the Lamborghini is. It's a car that you really have to manhandle because it moves around a lot.
To feel a car like that with so much power, you know, moving around underneath you. I got out and I wanted a cigarette, and I don't smoke. That powertrain is just ridiculous, and yet it's on some pretty skinny rubber.
It's kind of let down by the fact that it's on P0 tyres and not something more aggressive like a Cup 2 like a GT3 is.
I think with the right rubber, it could have challenged the GT3's lap time. Certainly got the power to do so.
Look, this car on the limit definitely has a lot more understeer than probably some of the other cars that it's competing against. So it doesn't produce the same kind of lap time around here, but it's probably, I suppose, the Lamborghini trying to look after their owners, because this car on the limit, if you made it very tail happy, would be very much a handful. So the understeer is all about looking after the driver. But just in this situation, you just wish you could carry that bit more speed. You kind of need to still clear the brakes early enough and just flow the speed through. But then if you carry too much, it ends up with a lot of understeer. But still a great fun car.
It's a curious thing, isn't it? Because most of the judges, if asked which would you spend your money on in the Performance Car of the Year field, looked at the Alpina. And yet there it is, bringing up the rear, winning the wooden spoon. That's no disgrace. The Alpina works really well as a road car. And if you're only ever going to drive it on the road, then we would give it a hearty recommendation. It felt a little bit out of its place on the track, and I think that's what ultimately pinged it down to the bottom of the order. The Jaguar F-Type endeared itself to many of the judges through sheer strength of character. It's a lovely car to look at, it's a lovely car to drive at 710s, and there's also something to be said for driving it hard as well.
There's a traditionalness to that car. You know, the car might be aging, but it offers an experience that you can buy fewer and fewer of these days.
But at the very, very pointy end of Piccoddy, there's a real demand for consistency, cohesion, and a level of engineering that just seems slightly beyond the Jaguar. The Taycan is not probably, certainly, the best performance EV you can buy today. And for it to finish 6th at Performance Car of the Year is an excellent result for it.
We're sort of at the precipice of this great shift. Great driving EVs will get cheaper. It's just a shame that that car is sort of beyond what most people can reach.
The future is going to arrive much, much faster than people think with electrification in cars. For me, the Taycan is a bridge to ease people into that realm, the car that we really ought to be looking at as a possible Pocotty winner as an electric car is probably the next generation Boxster and Cayman.
Australians are going to love the Corvette C8. Australia loves a V8, and this one's got a good one. The chassis is fundamentally well sorted. The car just draws attention.
What I really liked about it was it's its own thing. It's not trying to be like a Ferrari, it's not trying to be like the Huracan, it's not trying to be like the Porsche. It's got its own character. I wrote at one stage, can do Sunset Boulevard and the canyons. That's the way it felt to me, you know, really comfy cruiser, but when you wanted to get right up it would give you heaps back. So I loved it.
There aren't too many cars on the market here that have a naturally aspirated V8 anymore, so it should be celebrated. It would be celebrated if it was a mediocre Corvette. I'm fairly certain of that. But the fact that it's a damn good one, it's great. The Boxster is a car that barely puts a foot wrong. So you think, well, why doesn't it win? And I think the answer to that is that the highs of the cars that finished right at the top were higher. But in terms of sheer consistency of excellence, the Boxster, well, it's hard to top.
It is incredibly competent and capable, but it doesn't quite thrill in the way that it goes about its business. There's nothing to dislike about it. It's a fantastic sports car, but it doesn't stir the soul perhaps as viscerally as other cars in that field. Third place this year for the Performance Car of the Year field is the BMW M3. And that is a giant killing effort by that car. It does everything that we hope an M3 could do. Forget what you think about how this car looks. You need to experience the way this car drives.
If you're looking for a performance car that has an element of practicality about it, go out and buy a BMW M3. Buy the manual one as well, because it's going to be worth a fortune in future.
That is an objectively special car. To be driving a 2022 BMW M3 with 3 pedals and a H pattern is something to celebrate these days and something to cherish, because it's probably not going to happen for much longer.
It's a really, really rewarding driver's car. It's got a fantastic front end. It just locks itself onto a line. And then it's completely up to you whether you drive it in a disciplined way or you drive it like an absolute hooligan. The car just gives you so many options. And isn't that what we want from a performance car? It might not be the very best manual gearbox you've ever driven, but you'll forgive it that because everything else about that car is spot on. I've been a motoring journalist for over 20 years, and you kind of think you bring a certain seriousness to it, and that you're not going to be sucked in by the noise and the drama and the theatrics and the nonsense that surrounds Lamborghini. But you do. It's impossible not to be, because that's suffused throughout that car's character. It's beautiful, it's stunning to drive, it's loud, it's charismatic.
You know, you think it's going to be all drama and theatrics and sort of flavour with no taste, but underneath that sort of layer of contrived difference, there's a really good sports car underneath there.
I was switching between the Huracan and the GT3 1 and 2 before we got to the track. In the end, the Huracan got pipped. I think if there was any other car, if it was up against any other car, I can't see it being beaten. That car is the ultimate in X Factor.
It's a car that gets under your skin. It's enormously fun to drive, and it rewards a good driver as well.
It's dramatic, it's fast, but it does have its faults. And unfortunately for performance car contenders this year, faults aren't enough to win.
Why didn't the Huracan win? Well, it didn't win because the 911 GT3 was here, and that turned in a near perfect performance.
The winner of Performance Car of the Year for 2022 is the Porsche 911 992 GT3. Somehow, Porsche has raised the bar.
The Porsche 911 GT3 wins through sheer depth of engineering.
These cars win them for a reason. It's just the type of car that urges you to go faster and faster and faster, and it is a car you can absolutely trust.
It won because it's the best car there.
God, I know I came into that event being very conscious of not just defaulting to the normal winner, which is the Porsche. But you drive that car down the main straight of Phillip Island and go into turn 1 at high speed and get the feedback and the grip from that car. I defy anyone to not elevate that to the top of their list.
Pragmatically, on value, it is cheaper than the Huracan, and the dynamic heights of the GT3 just are beyond the Huracan.
Porsche understands what drivers want, and it just delivers it. They want a fast car, they want a capable car, they want a car that you can punish time and time again and it won't wilt. That's why you see the car park at Nürburgring full of 911 GT3s, because they work. We're going to look back on this generation GT3 as one of the really, really good ones. The 992 is just a fierce, angry car, and we need fierce, angry cars in a world where cars are being homogenized and the personality and character is being taken out of cars. It's great to find one that's absolutely bursting with charisma